Part 1, Tony Blackburn. Early 1970s Britain was tense, tired, and uncertain. Economic pressure, strikes, and cultural division weighed heavily on daily life. In that atmosphere, Radio 1 offered something deliberately lighter. Tony Blackburn became the most familiar voice in the country, greeting millions every morning with relentless cheer. His tone was bright, friendly, and uncomplicated. For the general public, he was comfort through routine. For critics, he was something else entirely. To the intellectual press and the emerging counterculture, Tony Blackburn symbolized empty entertainment. He talked constantly, yet seemed to say nothing of substance. Writers portrayed him as a man powered by sugar and sunshine, endlessly upbeat while the country struggled. His optimism felt artificial, even insulting, to those who believed popular culture should reflect social reality. Music journalists, especially those aligned with serious rock and political commentary, treated him as proof that mass media rewarded noise over thought. That perception hardened when Tony tried to reinvent himself as a pop singer. His records were not met with debate or curiosity, but with laughter. Critics described the songs as thin, glossy, and shallow. Yet Tony promoted them with complete confidence, appearing on television in open shirts and heavy jewelry, singing earnest love songs without irony. The mismatch between his self-image and public reaction turned him into a visual joke. The term medallion man followed him everywhere, shorthand for misplaced self-belief. The ridicule intensified when his private life collapsed in public view. During the breakdown of his marriage to actress Tessa Wyatt, Tony chose not to retreat. Instead, he turned his radio show into an emotional broadcast. He repeatedly played "If You Leave Me Now," his voice breaking between tracks, openly pleading on air. For a British audience raised on emotional restraint, the moment felt shocking and strangely comic. Many listeners interpreted it as emotional innocence taken too far, a man who believed real life could be fixed with a song dedication. His on-air persona added fuel to the fire. Tony regularly spoke to a fictional dog named Arnold, reacting to barking sound effects as if holding a real conversation. What might have amused very young listeners convinced adults that the men behind the microphone lived in a childish fantasy. Over time, he became the template for the cheerful but empty-headed radio host, later parroted as the smiling, shallow DJ who loved his own voice more than the music. When punk exploded and challenged everything his generation represented, Tony dismissed it casually. That dismissal sealed his reputation with younger audiences. To them, he was not just outdated, but unaware. A man protected by popularity, insulated from criticism, and untouched by cultural change. Tony Blackburn moved through the decades smiling, successful, and seemingly unbothered. Yet in the public imagination, he became a symbol rather than a person. A man with charm and visibility, but no perceived depth. A familiar voice that filled the air, while many believed there was nothing solid behind it. Was Tony Blackburn simply misunderstood, or did his constant cheerfulness invite the mockery that followed him? In the next part, we leave polished radio studios behind and enter the violent chaos of punk, where Sid Vicious became a symbol of something far more unsettling. Part 2, Sid Vicious. Sid Vicious stood at the center of punk as a contradiction. His image promised danger, rebellion, and raw power, yet his actual ability barely supported the myth built around him. Born John Simon Ritchie, he was not discovered for talent or discipline. He was reshaped. Under the guidance of Malcolm McLaren, Sid was stripped of his ordinary identity and rebuilt as a living provocation, designed to offend, unsettle, and attract attention without explanation. His recruitment into the Sex Pistols had little to do with music. Sid did not join because he could play the bass. He joined because he looked like chaos. Hollow eyes, sharp angles, hostile posture. The band needed a visual weapon, not a musician. Within the industry, it was an open secret that Sid could barely handle the instrument. During live performances, his amplifier was often turned down or disconnected entirely to prevent disaster. He thrashed, posed, sneered, and spat, unaware or unconcerned that his sound barely existed. To serious musicians, Sid represented an insult. Rock culture still carried ideas of skill and craft, even at its most rebellious. Sid ignored all of it. Lemmy Kilmister attempted to teach him bass, approaching the task with patience. The effort collapsed quickly. Sid showed no rhythm, no ear, and no desire to learn. Lemmy walked away, later describing the experience as impossible. That failure became legend. Sid was not incompetent by accident. He was incompetent by design. This made him valuable. Sid became useful precisely because he lacked depth. He was easy to control, easy to market, and easy to discard. While Johnny Rotten articulated punk with sharp language and social awareness, Sid expressed everything through destruction. He harmed himself, damaged property, and crossed lines without understanding why those lines existed. Acts meant to shock carried no philosophy. They were gestures without thought. The swastika shirt became the clearest example. Sid wore it not as ideology, but as noise. He knew it would anger people. That was enough. The lack of understanding behind the symbol did not matter to him, but it mattered deeply to everyone watching. What was meant as rebellion exposed his emptiness. The American tour completed the collapse. By then, the band was unraveling, and Sid became the spectacle. Media treated him like a strange animal, a symbol of British excess and stupidity. Violence followed him everywhere. His solo performance of My Way revealed the truth beneath the image. What was intended as satire felt like a confession. A man staggering through a performance with nothing to offer but damage. Sid Vicious was not celebrated for what he could do, but for what he destroyed. He was exploited by people smarter than him, consumed by audiences eager to laugh, and abandoned when the spectacle ended. His story is not one of rebellion, but of manipulation. A symbol manufactured to burn fast, leave ruins behind, and disappear before anyone asked what was missing inside. Was Sid Vicious ever in control of his own image, or was he shaped entirely by those who needed him to fail? Next, we move from punk chaos to television comedy, where playing the fool became a lifelong prison. Part 3, Paul Henry. In 70s Britain, no television character carried the stigma of stupidity more effectively than Benny Hawkins from Crossroads. The soap itself was treated with open contempt. Critics mocked its shaky sets, rushed production, and sentimental tone. Watching Crossroads became an ironic habit, something people claimed to laugh at rather than enjoy. At the center of that ridicule stood Benny, the gentle handyman who never quite understood what was happening around him. Benny Hawkins was written as kind, loyal, and harmless, but intellectually slow. Paul Henry played him with such conviction that the performance erased the boundary between fiction and reality. What began as a character became a cultural label. The name Benny stopped being a name. It became an insult. To call someone a Benny was to say they were foolish, clueless, or socially incapable. An acting success quietly turned into a social curse. Outside the studio, Paul Henry paid the price. Strangers spoke to him slowly and loudly, as if volume could replace intelligence. People assumed he needed help with simple tasks. Some treated him with forced kindness, others with open mockery. Few addressed him as a professional actor. Most addressed him as the man in the woolly hat. The public did not see a role. They saw a reflection of reality they believed was authentic. The media reinforced this collapse of identity. Photographs almost always showed Paul in costume, the oversized hat pulled low, eyes wide with confusion. Headlines reduced him to a visual gag. Interviews rarely explored his training or background. His years of serious theatrical work were ignored. Crossroads was discussed as a cultural embarrassment, and Benny was presented as proof that audiences would accept anything, as long as it was simple enough. Behind the scenes, the truth was painfully different. Paul Henry was a trained stage actor who approached Benny with care and observation. He based the character on real people, adding small gestures and emotional restraint to avoid cruelty. He treated the role as a study in vulnerability, not stupidity. That nuance never reached the audience. The speed of production and the hunger for ridicule flattened everything into a single joke. Attempts to escape the image failed repeatedly. Casting directors could not look past the hat. Scripts offered to him echoed the same foolish tone. When he tried music, the effort was treated as novelty, another reason to laugh rather than listen. Each attempt to redefine himself only reinforced the prison built by popularity. By the end of the decade, Paul Henry had achieved what most actors never do. He created a character everyone recognized instantly. Yet that recognition came at the cost of his own identity. He won professionally, but lost personally. The nation celebrated Benny, while quietly erasing the men who brought him to life. Was Paul Henry too convincing for his own good, or did audiences choose to believe the lie because it was more comfortable than the truth? In the next part, the comedy grows louder and crueler, as another actor discovers how dangerous it is to play the fool too well. Part 4, Andrew Sachs. In 70s Britain, comedy often crossed a line without apology. Fawlty Towers turned cruelty into rhythm, and Manuel became its most exposed target. He was the confused foreign waiter, permanently lost, endlessly misunderstood, and routinely humiliated. The laughter he generated was loud and constant, but it was laughter built on degradation. Manuel existed to be shouted at, struck, mocked, and corrected like a misbehaving child who never learned. Andrew Sachs understood exactly what he was doing. He was not an accidental fool. He was a highly trained performer with a background in radio drama, literature, and serious acting. He had fled Nazi Germany as a child and rebuilt his life through discipline and intelligence. None of that mattered once Manuel entered the public imagination. The character was so vivid that it erased the men behind it. Audiences did not laugh at a performance. They laughed at a person they believed to be real. Outside the studio, people approached Andrew speaking broken English, exaggerating every word, as if intelligence could be measured by accent alone. They shouted Manuel at him in the street. They expected confusion, obedience, and silence. The line between character and actor collapsed completely. Manuel became a container for social frustration. He was foreign, powerless, and endlessly wrong. That made him safe to punish. Basil Fawlty's aggression was reframed as comedy, and the audience joined in willingly. The joke worked because Manuel was perceived as someone who did not fully understand what was happening to him. That illusion justified everything. The popularity of the character spilled into music. Manuel's good food guide turned stupidity into a novelty product. Andrew performed it in character, knowing exactly what it meant. Acceptance paid the bills. Resistance would have ended the work. He leaned into the image, even as it narrowed his future. Behind the scenes, the cost was physical as well as psychological. Slapstick was not simulated gently. Andrew suffered serious injuries during filming, including burns and heavy impacts from props. He continued working through pain because the production demanded it. The audience never saw the damage. They saw a man who seemed too foolish to feel pain. Attempts to escape the role brought little change. Casting directors saw Manuel before they saw Andrew Sachs. Villains, intellectuals, complex men remained out of reach. The performance had been too precise, too convincing. Perfection became a trap. Andrew Sachs paid the full price of great acting. He delivered a character so complete that the world refused to believe he was anything else. Comedy rewarded him with fame, then quietly closed the door behind him. Did Manuel succeed because he was funny, or because audiences needed someone they were allowed to laugh at without guilt? Next, we move to another icon of television comedy, where falling down became a national obsession and intelligence was hidden behind disaster. Part 5, Michael Crawford. Michael Crawford entered the 1970s carrying a skill set that most performers never achieve. He possessed extreme physical control, fearless timing, and an obsessive commitment to precision. None of that mattered once Frank Spencer appeared on British television. Frank was helpless, clumsy, anxious, and permanently confused. He spoke in a high-strained voice and moved like a man at war with his own body. The nation did not see a character. The nation believed they were watching a real person. Frank Spencer quickly became a national symbol. Children copied him in playgrounds. Adults repeated his phrases at work. To be compared to Frank was not affectionate. It was shorthand for being useless, incompetent, and intellectually empty. The joke became communal. Everyone laughed together, not at a situation, but at a man assumed to have nothing going on inside his head. What the audience never acknowledged was the danger behind the laughter. Crawford performed his own stunts. He hung from moving vehicles, crashed through sets, and balanced his body in positions that terrified trained stunt professionals. Each fall was rehearsed with mathematical accuracy. Each mistake could have ended his career or his life. Yet the public read these moments as luck. They assumed he survived because fools always land safely. Skill was erased by the illusion of stupidity. The press helped seal that perception. Interviews framed Crawford as an extension of Frank Spencer. Journalists waited for awkward answers and nervous laughs. They were disappointed when intelligence surfaced. Profiles emphasized chaos and accident, reinforcing the idea that Crawford simply stumbled through success. Serious discussion of craft or ambition rarely appeared. That image carried consequences. Casting directors stopped seeing an actor. They saw a walking punchline. Scripts for serious drama never arrived. When Crawford expressed interest in complex roles, the response was polite disbelief. Audiences, producers, and critics all agreed on one thing. Frank Spencer was who he was. Anything else would feel wrong. The psychological weight was heavy. Crawford was a perfectionist who wanted respect, not just approval. Being underestimated became a daily burden. Praise for laughter felt hollow when it came packaged with dismissal. He smiled through it because the work demanded it. Survival required obedience to the image. Behind the scenes, Crawford endured quietly. He trained relentlessly, protected his voice, and waited. He understood that escaping a beloved fool required patience measured in years, not seasons. The intelligence people denied him became the tool that eventually saved him. Michael Crawford survived the decade by pretending not to be himself. He gave the public what it wanted while hiding everything that mattered. His success proved a brutal truth of entertainment. Sometimes the safest way to stay employed is to convince the world you are less than you are. Was Frank Spencer a mirror of national insecurity, or did the audience simply enjoy laughing at someone they believed was beneath them? Next, the story moves from clumsy innocence to deliberate foolishness, where popularity came from selling confusion as desire. Part 6, Robin Asquith. By the mid-1970s, British cinema was struggling to survive. Budgets shrank, audiences drifted away, and prestige projects collapsed one by one. Into that vacuum stepped the Confessions series, films designed to be broad, cheeky, and easily marketable. They did not aim for elegance or depth. They aimed for quick laughs and reliable ticket sales. At the center of it all stood Robin Asquith. His character, Timmy Leah, was built as a walking misunderstanding. Cheerful, wide-eyed, and permanently confused, Timmy moved through situations driven by impulse rather than thought. He reacted instead of acting. Things happened to him, usually because he lacked the sense to avoid them. The humor depended on his mental simplicity. Audiences were invited to laugh because he never seemed to learn. Critics despised it. To them, the Confessions film symbolized cultural collapse. They dismissed Asquith as a performer who succeeded not through ability, but through shamelessness. Reviews framed him as a grinning fool who stumbled into success while better actors starved for work. The contempt was public and relentless. Yet the films kept selling. In a failing industry, they became financial lifelines. That success erased the line between actor and role. In the street, people called him Timmy. They shouted jokes. They treated him like a character who had wandered off screen. Television hosts reinforced the image, interviewing him with mock surprise, as if astonished he could speak clearly. He was framed as a lucky accident, not a trained professional. The irony was uncomfortable. Robin Asquith was a capable actor with classical training and serious early work. He understood structure, timing, and restraint. None of that mattered. The public preferred the idea that he was simply playing himself. The industry followed that assumption. Offers narrowed. Scripts repeated the same shallow outline. Intelligence became irrelevant to his market value. Asquith made a practical decision. He accepted the image because it paid. In an industry collapsing around him, turning away guaranteed income would have been irresponsible. He leaned into the persona with outward ease, smiling through the ridicule, understanding that popularity is a short-lived currency. What he earned financially, he lost artistically. The long-term cost was isolation from serious work. Casting directors stopped calling. Critics stopped reconsidering. When the Confessions formula finally burned out, the industry moved on without him. He was wealthy, recognizable, and professionally stranded. The same films that kept studios alive quietly removed him from the artistic conversation. Robin Asquith became proof that success and respect do not always travel together. He gave audiences what they wanted and was punished for it later. The laughter made him famous, then made him disposable. Was Robin Asquith underestimated by choice, or was he simply trapped by the role that saved his career? Next, the focus shifts to a woman whose image of innocence concealed sharp intelligence, and whose smile became her greatest limitation. Part 7, Barbara Windsor. Barbara Windsor became trapped inside a smile the country refused to look beyond. In the Carry On films, femininity was simplified into noise and movement. Women existed to react, to giggle, to misunderstand what was happening around them. Barbara was placed at the center of that system. Her characters were cheerful, innocent, and permanently one step behind the joke. The laughter depended on her not quite understanding what everyone else already knew. That innocence was carefully constructed, but the audience treated it as natural. The dumb blonde image settled quickly and stubbornly. Critics spoke of her as light entertainment, disposable and shallow. They ignored the craft required to hold comedic rhythm and timing. The joke was never about the situation. It was about her supposed lack of awareness. What disappeared entirely was her background. Barbara Windsor was not discovered by accident. She was trained, disciplined, and shaped by serious theater. She had worked with demanding directors and learned how to control space, voice, and presence. None of that survived contact with popular culture. The industry decided what she represented, and repetition did the rest. Her private life became another stage for judgment. Tabloids framed personal choices as proof of limited intelligence. Relationships were interpreted not as human complexity, but as evidence that the woman on screen and the woman off screen were the same naive figure. Sympathy rarely appeared. The tone was patronizing, as if she needed protection from her own decisions. Interviews reinforced the imbalance. Hosts asked harmless questions with exaggerated care, speaking slowly, smiling indulgently, as though addressing someone fragile. Wit was overlooked. Knowledge was ignored. Barbara learned quickly what the public wanted. Resistance meant disappearance. Survival meant cooperation. She accepted roles that repeated the same outline because work was safer than dignity. Each performance strengthened the cage. As trends shifted and the carry-on style faded, the industry moved forward without her. The image that once guaranteed popularity now blocked opportunity. Directors hesitated to place her in serious material, convinced audiences would laugh before she spoke. Being discarded hurt more than being mocked. The laughter at least acknowledged her presence. Silence suggested she had nothing left to offer. For years, she carried a reputation that was never hers, waiting for a chance to be seen differently. Barbara Windsor spent the decade hiding intelligence behind performance. She mastered the art of appearing simple in a culture that rewarded it. The tragedy was not that people laughed, but that they never questioned why the laughter felt so easy. Was Barbara Windsor playing the fool, or did the audience need her to be one to feel comfortable? In the next part, physical power replaces innocence, as a towering figure discovers that strength means nothing when your voice is ignored. Part 8, David Prowse. David Prowse embodied one of the most striking contradictions of the 1970s. On screen, he was power, menace, and absolute authority. To the world, he was the physical presence of Darth Vader, a figure that defined cinematic evil. Yet away from the costume, he was treated as if strength automatically excluded intelligence. Fame followed him everywhere, but respect rarely did. In British culture of the time, voice carried class. David's strong West Country accent became an invisible sentence. It marked him as rural, unsophisticated, and unpolished in the eyes of industry elites. No matter his discipline or professionalism, the accent framed how he was perceived. Muscles and regional speech combined into a stereotype that proved difficult to escape. During the filming of Star Wars, David delivered every line with seriousness and commitment. He believed his voice would be part of the finished character. The decision to replace it was made quietly and without his knowledge. When the film premiered, he learned the truth in the cinema like everyone else. The message was unmistakable. His body was valuable. His voice was not. The most iconic villain in film history spoke through someone else. That humiliation extended beyond a single role. On later productions, including the sequel, David was deliberately excluded from major plot information. Filmmakers feared he could not be trusted with secrets. The assumption was not based on behavior, but on prejudice. He was kept in the dark because others decided he lacked the awareness to protect the story. Silence was imposed from above. In Britain, his public identity leaned heavily on the Green Cross Codemen, a character created to teach children how to cross the road safely. The role saved lives, yet it reduced him symbolically. A towering adult explaining basic rules to children became a source of mockery. Comedians and columnists treated the image as proof that he belonged in simplified spaces, not serious drama. The press reinforced the narrative with patronizing language. David was described as gentle, obedient, and uncomplicated. Rarely was he asked about art, politics, or ambition. His physicality became the whole story. In an industry shaped by class, appearance outweighed substance. Looking like a laborer meant thinking like one, at least in the imagination of cultural gatekeepers. David Prowse spent the decade hidden inside masks, costumes, and campaigns that stripped away his individuality. He was visible everywhere, yet personally erased. His fame depended on silence. The louder the character became, the quieter he was expected to remain. His story exposes an uncomfortable truth. In entertainment, power does not guarantee voice. Sometimes it removes it. David Prowse became an icon, but not on his own terms. He stood at the center of popular culture while being treated as intellectually absent, a presence designed to be seen and never fully heard. Was David Prowse denied a voice because of who he was, or because the industry needed him to remain silent? Next, the story turns to a man who pretended to fail so convincingly that the world never realized it was watching a master at work. Part 9, Tommy Cooper. Tommy Cooper built a career by failing on purpose. On stage, nothing worked. Props slipped, tricks collapsed, timing fell apart, and he stared into the crowd with the vacant confusion of a man who seemed unaware of his own hands. The act looked accidental, uncontrolled, almost tragic. Audiences laughed because it felt real. They believed they were watching a grown man who simply could not get things right. That belief became the problem. The public did not see a crafted routine. They saw a man they assumed was genuinely dim. His disasters were interpreted as truth rather than performance. Viewers shouted advice from their seats, treating him like a large child who needed help. The laughter was affectionate, but it was also dismissive. Skill disappeared behind the illusion of incompetence. In reality, the act demanded extreme precision. To make a magic trick fail convincingly requires deeper mastery than making it succeed. Timing had to be exact. Mistakes had to look spontaneous while remaining safe. Cooper was a respected member of the magic circle, trusted by professionals who understood how difficult his work actually was. That respect rarely crossed into public awareness. Fame intensified the isolation. Off stage, people expected clumsiness to continue. They waited for him to drop plates in restaurants or trip in shops. The character followed him everywhere. Conversations were framed around jokes, not ideas. Serious discussion felt unwelcome. The more he succeeded, the smaller the space became for the men behind the fez. Alcohol became part of the image, and the image made it easier to ignore the warning signs. Slurred speech and unsteady movement were treated as extensions of the act. Concern was replaced by laughter. The line between character and collapse blurred until neither the audience nor those around him knew where one ended and the other began. Inside, the contradiction grew heavier. Cooper wanted admiration for his craft, not just applause for failure. He understood that people paid to see him embarrass himself. That knowledge created a quiet conflict. Each laugh confirmed success while deepening invisibility. He had become a genius applauded for pretending not to be one. Loneliness followed fame closely. The stage offered validation, but not understanding. When the lights went down, the mask stayed on. The world preferred him confused, clumsy, and harmless. Intelligence threatened the comfort of the joke. Tommy Cooper spent his life proving that brilliance can hide in plain sight. He convinced an entire nation that he was a fool, and they never questioned it. The act worked too well. He was celebrated everywhere and understood almost nowhere. Did Tommy Cooper choose to disappear behind his character, or did the audience refuse to let him be anything else? Next, we meet a towering figure whose size invited laughter, while his intellect remained invisible behind a familiar grin. Part 10, Bernard Bresslaw. Bernard Bresslaw entered the public imagination as a shape before he was seen as a person. Tall, broad, and physically imposing, he fit perfectly into a British comedy tradition that reduced large men to harmless fools. In the Carry On films, size meant simplicity. The bigger the body, the smaller the mind was assumed to be. Bresslaw became the clearest example of that belief. His roles followed a rigid pattern. He played gentle giants who struggled to understand basic situations, men easily confused by wordplay and authority, characters designed to be outsmarted by smaller, sharper figures. The humor relied on contrast. Laughter came from watching a powerful body paired with a childish mind. Repetition cemented the image. Audiences stopped seeing variation. They saw expectation fulfilled again and again. What remained invisible was the men beneath the performance. Bernard Bresslaw was highly educated, intellectually curious, and deeply serious about acting. Off-set, he read philosophy, studied literature, and spoke thoughtfully about history and theater. He carried an admiration for Shakespeare and longed to explore complex roles that demanded emotional and psychological range. None of that aligned with the image the industry needed from him. Carry on simplified humanity into broad strokes. Subtlety was unnecessary. Nuance slowed the joke. Bresslaw understood the trade. He accepted humiliation disguised as comedy because it provided stability. Dressing in absurd costumes, stumbling through scenes, and playing ignorance for laughs became routine. Each performance paid the bills and quietly erased another layer of possibility. The press treated him as a mascot rather than an artist. Interviews focused on his size, his clumsiness, and his willingness to play the fool. Rarely was he asked what he thought. When he was, the questions carried surprise, as if intelligence had appeared by accident. Assumptions did most of the work before he spoke. Silence became a survival strategy. Challenging the image risked unemployment. Speaking openly about ambition invited disbelief. The industry preferred him compliant and predictable. Casting directors saw his face and body and decided his limits instantly. The same expression that earned laughter closed doors elsewhere. The tragedy was not ridicule alone. It was confinement. Bernard Bresslaw was not mocked because he failed. He was mocked because he succeeded too well at something he never wanted to define him. Comedy demanded he appear simple, and so he hid complexity to remain visible. His story exposes a quiet cruelty in entertainment. Appearance can become destiny. The audience laughs, the industry profits, and the individual disappears behind a silhouette that never changes. Bernard Bresslaw lived inside that silhouette for an entire decade, carrying intelligence in silence while playing the fool aloud. Was Bernard Bresslaw remembered for who he truly was, or only for the shape he was forced to inhabit? This ends our journey through the decade, but the question remains whether the laughter revealed truth, or merely hid it in plain sight.